I felt that I had disappointed people. Life is too short to do anything other than what you're passionate about.
Science sisters, they're here to talk.
Being an academic isn't for everyone. Being capable of functioning outside of the prison of academia. Who's my target audience? There is value to this stuff now. Just because something is low science capital
oh yeah, she's your host.
I feel like you can dream a little bigger.
Science sisters, let's start the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Science Sisters. I'm your host, Iris van Zelst, and today I'm doing a good old Zoom call with Simon Clark, PhD in atmospheric physics and YouTube celebrity extraordinaire.
No, some of that was accurate.
At some point, you decided, let's leave academia behind. Let's go for this great science communicator life. So that is going to be the topic of today, science communication and leaving academia. Simon, take us back to the end of your PhD. What's going on in your mind? Why did you decide? Why did you decide it?
I'm an unusual case, I think, because when I handed in the thesis, I knew that I wanted to do SciComm, not anticipating it would be a success, but because I sensed that there was an opportunity. There was like a moment that I could try and capitalize on. And the reason that moment existed is because I'd been making videos on a YouTube channel for, at that point, about 8 years. So I just kind of took the leap. Just about turned out all right, I think.
I think so too, yeah. So was it scary to make that leap?
In a way, yes. I mean, I also knew that I didn't want to stay in academia anyway. It felt like such a natural progression from how I'd previously been making videos to just do it but full time. I knew there were other options, like, for example, working in industry or possibly applying to be a teacher, say, because those are other things that I enjoyed doing. You know, I enjoyed the topic that I was researching, not quite as much as I enjoyed the process of researching, the process of writing code and applying the scientific method to, you know, a project. The process was what really interested me more than the actual subject matter. So, you know, I could have done that in industry, but it just felt like a natural continuation. And so in that sense, it wasn't scary. I just felt like, well, I'll give it all I've got. And if it turns out that it doesn't work, that's a problem for future Simon. Present day Simon is just going to try and enjoy this opportunity.
So why didn't you want to stay in academia? Why did you already know that for certain?
So I had a relatively unusual PhD. My supervisor was the head of the department, but had never had a student before. So they'd spent something like 3 decades working in industry. And so they really knew their stuff, but they also were drudged down with a lot of administrative tasks and all the stuff that comes with being head of department. And they also just didn't really know, I think, what was expected of them as a supervisor. So over the course of the PhD, me and another guy who was starting at the same time, we just didn't really get supervised and we didn't get publications out. 6 months before we had to submit, we got taken aside by a second supervisor who looked through what we were proposing and said, yeah, we need to redo all of this. Like, you've not been supervised, have you? I knew coming out of the PhD that I didn't have publications. And frankly, that experience, quite apart from the whole fact that if you don't have publications, that's a problem because that's kind of how you're assessed. But the whole experience and just being left cut adrift a bit. And I should point out that was partly my fault because obviously the thing with being a PhD is that you are in a conversation. You're not told what to do. It's a two-way street. But when it's your first PhD, as it is for basically everybody, you don't know that, you know, and it's very difficult to stand up to somebody who is a very senior academic. So I do have to bear some responsibility for that, for sure. But that whole experience had just sort of left me a bit turned off, really. I like the idea of academia. And there have been times when I did my master's, I really enjoyed that process of being in a research group and feeling part of a community. I really, really enjoyed that. But the PhD just kind of turned me off enough to want to walk away. I might go back in the future. I'm not totally against it, but right now, this is what I want to be doing.
I can sympathize. But then my considerations coming outside of the PhD at the other end was like, well, can I really judge academia based on what I have experienced? Maybe I should do a postdoc, get that as a normal baseline, and then judge. And then my postdoc started in January 2020. I've been stuck at home. So now I need to do another postdoc for another baseline. And in the end, I'll just be stuck in academia forever, searching for normality.
It's the Sankey diagram that they showed us of how many people that start the PhD stay in academia for their entire lives. And it's a tiny percentage. It's a couple of percent will make full professorship.
Exactly. It's really, really low.
And the fact is that's because there aren't enough places because it's a pyramid. But also, yeah, it's not an environment for everybody. The process of doing academia as a job, you know, being an academic, isn't for everyone. And I feel like that should be made clear a bit earlier, perhaps, what the life of a postdoc in particular, because that's one of the longest stretches of the road, you know, what that is actually like. And is that something that you want to do with your life? The other thing that really turned me off doing a postdoc was so I have a friend and I said to her that I was looking forward to things calming down. If I was going to do a postdoc, it would be calmer than the end of the PhD. And she was like, oh, no. The postdoc is like those last few feverish months of the PhD, but just forever. And
yes.
No, I don't want that. I like to imagine postdocs as being like medieval medieval knights. Like you go on quests for 6 months at a time or a year. You slay that dragon, you save that princess, and then you come back and you get rewarded and you go on to the next thing. It sounds romantic, but it's a ball ache, isn't it? You know, having to change where you live, having to go through all the same processes every single time of, you know, apart from moving house, just setting up with a new university and getting used to new people. And it's not for everyone. I feel like that's something that needs to be drilled into people at university, that, like, you know, do a PhD if you're passionate about a subject, yes, but get experience and look into what it's like to do a postdoc if you're serious about doing this as a research career, because you've got to have that in mind. If you are thinking of being a researcher, you've got to be aware of what that practically means for your life.
I do really like your analogy with knights, only I just want to kind of say, I don't think there are rewards. I don't think you slay the dragon. Like, maybe your first quest was to slay a dragon and you'll kind of end up doing that somewhere in the middle of your third because you happened upon the dragon finally.
Finally, I got funding for this. I can buy a shield. That means I can go and do the dragon.
At last. Did it ever feel like a failure to leave academia, or that people look down upon you? Because that is a stigma in academia. If you leave academia, you're out.
I definitely did feel that a little bit. Partly, I was so sick of the process at that point. I just didn't care what other people thought. But also, I mean, certainly my friendship background and my family, nobody has a PhD. Nobody knows what you're supposed to do afterwards. So as far as they were concerned, I just did something completely normal. Like, it's only if you grew up in an environment with lots of people having PhDs or masters that, you know, the idea of leaving academia would be seen as strange. I think to most people, you go to university and then you leave and you do a job. That's just the normal way of doing things. I don't know if that was also internalized in me, but it certainly, I felt that I had disappointed people and disappointed the trust that people had placed in me. But at the same time, I knew why I was doing it. And it wasn't mostly my fault that I was in this situation of feeling like I had to leave because I didn't have publications. Yeah, I reckon it's probably because I came from a background where it was just such an unusual thing to do a PhD that I never really felt like it was a failure, because what am I comparing it to?
Yeah, we don't fail if we leave academia.
No, absolutely not. No. And that does need to be normalized.
Yes.
Quite apart from the fact that, like, statistically it needs to be normalized, because that's what almost everybody does at some point or another.
Yes. Why stay if you don't want to? It doesn't make any sense.
Life is too short to do anything other than what you're passionate about. It really is quite a short amount of time that you get to do what you are passionate about. And especially if you factor in things like settling down and having kids or something, there's a really narrow window when you are of university age, probably up to the age of perhaps 30 or 35, when you do just get to concentrate on what you want to do, what you are passionate about. Yes, parents obviously do get to do that, but there is the additional baggage of having to move with kids and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, if you only have a couple of years in which to focus on truly what makes you happy and why you are alive, ultimately, then why spend several 3 or 4 years just doing something that's making you miserable just for a certificate?
I think you're sending me in an existential crisis now.
No, don't worry. Don't. It's all going to be fine.
I mean, you're telling me that I sound enthusiastic and as an academic when I talk about these things.
Well, I have just been writing a book about this, so I feel like this is a good time to catch me whilst I'm being effusive about the stratosphere.
That is very true. Okay, so, you know, continuing with the plug for the book, what kind of thing do you do as a science communicator?
Well, I wrote a book.
Oh.
This is great. I barely even have to sell it myself. The book has been the project for about the past 2 years. The main thing that I do is obviously videos. I make videos on my eponymous YouTube channel, and that's mostly videos on Earth science, so mostly atmospheric science with climate science in particular. A pretty healthy dollop of just stuff that I think is interesting and fun. The thing that connects them all together is, because it is just, sometimes it'll be, this is a topic I think is important to talk about in atmospheric science. Sometimes it will be, this is a bit of code I wanted to write. The thing that ties them together is methodology. The end result isn't important. It's showing how you get to that result, how you approach the problem, and what science you use, whether that's analytical stuff. So my video on Venus, for example, talking about the fact that the greenhouse effect is non-linear, or in the computer code talking about machine learning techniques. It's about bringing people in with an interesting idea and then teaching them the methodology, trying to teach them in such a way that they can apply those ideas elsewhere. To me, there's kind of like a pyramid of science communication. There's raising awareness of a topic, and then there's above that a literacy, a scientific literacy of these ideas. How do you apply these ideas elsewhere? So you could argue that above those two, there's a kind of, can I do this myself? How do I apply these skills practically? So I try and aim for that middle part of the pyramid, sometimes with the emphasis on practical practical. If you want to do this yourself, this is the computer code I used. But generally, I try to focus on that more than just raising the awareness of something. It's not just, here's an interesting case study. It's, this is how I approach this as a scientist. This is the techniques that you use to investigate this phenomenon. And that also carries over to the book. So the book's called Firmament, The Hidden Science of Climate Change, Weather, and the Air That Surrounds Us. And that is primarily introducing people to atmospheric science, assuming that you don't really know anything about it. But along the way, introducing methodology and introducing the concepts that are used in actual analysis. So talking about stuff like principal component analysis, or talking about the nature of numerical weather prediction. So it's trying to put that emphasis again on methodology, and not just scientifically, but also a historical perspective, because I think it's a fascinating story, and it's a story that intersects with so many different other concepts. And then you have to ask yourself, right, who were these people? Why did they want to do this? How were they able to do this? And it grounds and it contextualizes science and scientists in a way that makes it seem more accessible. It removes this idea of the scientist being the genius who was just destined from birth to be amazing and is naturally just put on a pedestal. Actually, these people were just normal people who were buoyed on a tide of economic and social circumstance that led them to do this work. And to me, that makes science much more accessible as a practice, and the idea of being a scientist much more possible to somebody who might be interested in it. You need to take that scientific work, which is interesting and important for outreach purposes, but like layer it, contextualize it in the details of your life. And suddenly people realize, oh, I could do that. I don't need to be special or have two heads or even be, particularly smart in order to do this. You just need to refuse to give up. That's basically the defining characteristic of a scientist.
Yeah, definitely. 100%.
Scientists are humans too,
Well, I'm very excited about your book. I seem like very much a target audience because I know nothing about atmospheric physics, and I do need to know something about it because now it will literally be my job.
Yes, perfect timing for you.
At the very least, it seems as if you put a lot of thought into it, into the perceived goal, which I think is probably one of the most important things, if it has a clear idea within it.
Yeah, very much. And that's very noticeable for books in particular, I think, because the production cycle is so much longer. It takes, in my case, about 2 years in order for it to be finished. Yeah, you have the time to think, right, who am I doing? And this is admittedly something I try to do with everything I make is, who's my target audience? What's my objective? What's the learning objective here? What do I want them to walk away with? And it's something that I always stress when I talk to people about how to do SciComm. It's the picture frame in a way is just as important or more important than the picture. It's the format that you choose, the way in which you're presenting this information totally changes how people will perceive it. And you've got to think critically about it. For something that's going to take you years to do, those are the first questions you should ask. And then only once you have good solid answers to those questions, skeleton out the rest of the information that you want to put in.
I'm reassessing all my outreach projects.
Sorry.
Yeah. So then last thing, kind of wrapping the academic part and the science communication part together. Obviously, we've talked about being an academic is hard, especially the postdoc phase. You never know when you will settle, if you will ever settle. But you also have your finger in lots of different pies. I can imagine that it's difficult to kind of find enough projects. I mean, I guess you're a freelancer, independent. So it comes with its own set of difficulties to stay afloat, I guess.
Yeah. And I go through phases of enjoying being a businessman and working for myself and hating it in a very fitting way, I suppose, for somebody who used to be a scientist. One of my favorite things about doing this is having a finance spreadsheet I can populate with data, and then I can do projections, I can do analysis. I absolutely love that part of it, the data-driven part of doing this job. It has its own challenges, and sometimes you do have to compromise kind of what you want to do with what you need to do in order to stay afloat. And something that I'm struggling with, and this is a YouTube specific problem, is trying only to upload stuff that I thought was really good, really pushing what I was capable of doing. One video a month. And the problem with that was the videos were so spaced out that the YouTube algorithm, as far as I can tell, this is what happened. Nobody really understands the YouTube algorithm, even YouTube. What I think was happening was that I was releasing infrequently enough that my new videos weren't getting recommended to a new audience. And so what I had to do recently was make this switch to, right, well, we'll still make these videos that I really think are going to push the boundary, but let's do 2, maybe 3 videos a month that are just going to be easier to produce. Doing that means that the videos that you think are worthwhile actually then get more views because you are boosting yourself up. It's this slightly strange situation that I don't like being in, where you have to really strategize, almost like you're a kind of a Hollywood producer. You have to plan out your release schedule. I wish that I could just make a video and it would get views proportional to how good it is. Unfortunately, one of the nature of YouTube is that just doesn't work. It just doesn't work like that. And you have to account for how people are actually going to consume your content. That's something I don't like about doing this. It's the bits where you have to, what feels like, even if it's not actually, compromise on what you want to do in terms of the science communication, I really don't like. Plus, of course, there's the stress of, can you afford to pay yourself and afford to live?
Yeah.
That's small stress. digress.
Minor thing. Okay, so this explains your these are books I've read recently video.
Well, that was actually a series that I did for quite a while, and that was actually another example of kind of long-term strategy. I was angling to write a book for quite a while before they approached me, but I did a series of these are books that I like, these are some textbooks that I think are really good, and just trying to become known, and even doing interviews with some people about their favorite books, but just becoming known as somebody who had books as part of their online profile. So I was doing that for probably about 2 or 3 years before I got approached by the publisher to consider writing one.
That's a lot of strategy behind it then.
That's the only example of that working though.
I mean, it worked out.
I mean, the current strategy is I'm now playing and painting Warhammer on Twitch and on YouTube because I like doing that. And if they want to sponsor me, that would be amazing. I mean, technically it is part of my job, but if I could call that more of a part of my job, that would be absolute dream job. That's, I suppose, the next phase of that is if I keep doing this, maybe eventually Games Workshop will want to work with me.
I think that's a brilliant strategy. Put yourself out there. Otherwise, how will they know?
Yeah, exactly. A phrase that I really like is if you don't do it, it won't get done. Especially if you've been in academia, you're used to being told what to do in one way or another. Like you are told as a master's student, this is your project. In a PhD, you're told this is roughly what your project is. So to be freelance and to have that agency for the first time, really, being self-employed, you eventually realize that no one's telling me what to do. And if I want to do something, I've got to do it or it won't happen. You've been institutionalized and you're almost incapable of functioning outside of the prison of academia. And this bewildering choice that you have of what videos to make and, how you're going to make money and all that kind of stuff it's liberating in one sense. It's terrifying in another. But I think that there has been something of a sea change, though, in academic institutions just get now that outreach is important, and specifically that social media outreach is important. There is value to this. And yeah, I think unis and funding bodies get that there is value to this stuff now. And I think the thing that will take a little longer to catch up is that there is value in low science capital outreach. Just because you're not talking to an audience of Guardian readers who are 40 to 50 in a local town hall about your research. Yes, you might be talking at a higher level, but what social good are you doing by giving that talk? Are you going to perform more of a social good by raising scientific literacy and scientific awareness in young people by posting on TikTok? There is a balancing act here of how specific do you want to go and how high level do you want to bring people's knowledge to versus how broad do you want the impact of this to be? And ultimately, what would you rather do? Would you rather have a broad societal impact or try and inspire potentially the next round of researchers? Something I certainly do both of. I try and some videos are really quite high level, really, in terms of what they're actually depicting. But a lot of the stuff that I do, especially the stuff that I do on Twitch, is more just raising awareness of science. And this is how the scientific process is like. Just because something is low science capital doesn't mean that it has low value. I'm increasingly the opinion, actually, that low science capital outreach, in a way, the lowest common denominator, the better, while still actually trying to say something, has more social benefit. Because it's very possible to dilute it to the point where you're trying to reach absolutely everybody and you're not actually communicating anything. You're just telling people that there are 8 planets in the solar system. Like how much benefit you actually, sure, for kids, that's an important step. I feel like you can dream a little bigger. You can try and communicate more information even with a low capital audience like that.
I was thinking about what you were saying about funding agencies valuing outreach, because I'm not sure if that's, I would love it to be the case for if people hire you. And they always say that that's the case. And it's very important that research, teaching and outreach. But then when you see who gets the job, it's mostly research so far.
Well, that's the thing. But also, do you want to hire an academic who is mostly research with a bit of outreach or mostly outreach with a bit of research? It depends on the department. I think there is a role for somebody who is mostly there, in a way, almost as a journalist for social media. This is what's happening in our department. This is because, they're still doing research and they're still contributing to science. But just because they are doing a bit more of the outreach stuff doesn't mean that they are less valuable. You could argue they could be the most valuable member of a department.
In the same way that there are lecturers in the UK where you have mostly teaching duties, you still do some amount of research, but obviously you need really good teachers as well.
Yeah, let's not get into the laundry list of this is how we would like to change academia.
It's a very long list.
And naturally, as you say, that kind of tied together a lot of the discussion, I think, actually. It's just so great to have a chance to talk about this stuff, really, and have that voice from the inside of academia talking about this stuff critically, what it means to do science communication and what it means to be in academia. I think this is a really important kind of message to talk about. So I'm really just glad that we had the opportunity to talk about it for so long.
Oh, yeah. I've loved it. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for watching all the way to this point.
I want to point out, I'm so sweaty because it's the hottest day of the the year. That's why I look like I have a flop sweat. I'm not really nervous. It's very warm. I just wanted to get that in there. It's 30.8 degrees. Climate change is a serious issue, everyone. Let me go on the record of saying it right now.
Thank you very much for watching all the way to this point in the video. If you want to find out more about Simon, you can find him in the description. Probably you know him better than you know me. So, you know, if that's the case, like and subscribe. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. If you look at Earth and Venus from an exoplanet perspective, they would both look exactly the same and as habitable.
Wow, man, that you're trying to drag me back in, aren't you? You're trying to drag me back to academia.
No.
What's happening here?
I just got carried away. I'm sorry.
Someone's going to make an academia video game, and it will be the most sadistic thing because it will be impossible to beat.